Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Marika and Albright. I'm so excited to be here with these two amazing people. And thank you all for joining us and whoever is watching the recording after this. I am just thrilled to be part of this discussion today to discuss our non-boring philosophy to civics and voting with these two phenomenal individuals. So Ben is a former award-winning executive producer at Funny or Die. He founded OMG WTF to educate voters, and he is also a modern founding father, author of this essential book, OMG WTF Does the Constitution Actually Say? That's what I'm going to call you from now on, a modern founding father.
I'll take it.
And then Kat here is a lawyer, activist, and social entrepreneur, a title which I absolutely adore, by the way. She is founder and executive director of Spread the Vote, which helps Americans obtain IDs so that they can live, work, and of course, vote. She is a self-titled voting prepper on her podcast, Vote the Podcast, which gets essential information out to voters that could not come at a more crucial time. So thank you guys for your work and for being with us here today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So, well, thanks for having me. Well, I guess I wanted to start with a common theme that I noticed throughout all of our work is that we like to make knowledge accessible and break down complicated or daunting information in a way that's informative, but also engaging. And I like to say, I want to make knowledge sexy and like, why can't it be cool to be smart? So I wanted to talk to each of you about the work that you're doing and how you are fulfilling that need. So Ben, we can start with you. You had a long and successful career in Hollywood. And one thing that people always ask me is, how did you go from acting to politics? You know, it seems so random, but it's actually really not. So can you tell us how you went from a producer at Funny or Die to making gerrymandering jewelry and writing a book about the Constitution?
Sure. Well, I grew up in DC and I've always been around politics. And so I feel like I've soaked it in over the years and studied it in school. And so when I was at Funny or Die, a lot of the videos that I worked on were political. They were either projects with the then White House. They were projects taking issues, things like climate change and voting rights and breaking them down for the masses, I should say, making them understandable. And part of the goal was to take things that people don't necessarily not care about. It's just never been presented in a really accessible way. So I sort of took that approach when I started OMG WTF and our gerrymander jewelry. You know, gerrymandering, just the topic itself is not exactly a sexy topic. The word is weird. So I thought that through jewelry, we could find a way to make it more interesting. So we did this 60-second ad, this like beautiful Zales Jared jewelry ad. We launched a real website, Gerrymander Jewelry. You can go there now or after this, you can buy the jewelry. And we used it as a way to teach people what it is, why it happens, and when they can do something about it. By the way, it's this year. We only have 3 months or so until we elect people who are going to be drawing the lines that last for 10 years. So if we care about fair elections for the US House, fair elections for our state house and state legislature, fair elections in our local offices that are done by district, then this is the year to make a change and put people in office who are going to draw fair lines. And most of those people are state legislators. So, you know, in reality, it's sort of taking the things that I learned at Funny or Die, ways to make things a little more simple and less boring, and applying it to something that I was already passionate about.
I think that's crucial. Can you tell everyone what OMG WTF stands for? How do you got that?
Sure. So during 2018, it stood for Ohio, Michigan, Georgia, Wisconsin, Texas, and Florida. Now it is just a general sentiment that seems to be a constant every day.
Yeah. I think it's so cool what you guys are doing. I'm a big fan. And I think that not understanding how our government works, it has very real consequences, which we're seeing. And so Kat, as you know, our resident expert on activism and voting, I was hoping you could walk us through a little bit about the current reality of voting rights and participation and how it led you to start Spread the Vote.
Sure. I could talk for 3 hours on that.
I know, it's a big question.
So I'll take the second half first. So at Spread the Vote, we help primarily help people get IDs in mostly voter ID states so that they can vote. For folks who don't know, over 21 million eligible voters in this country don't have photo ID, and 36 states have voter ID laws on the books, although there are circumstances in all 50 in which you need them. And so we help folks get all of the documents required. If you've ever been to the DMV, you know you need a lot of documents to get an ID. We help pay all of the fees required. We help with advocacy, transportation, all the things that people need to get an ID in their hands so that they can use it for everything that you need an ID for in life, but then also to vote. But one of the things that we realized we had to start doing very early was a lot of voter education. 77% of our clients have never voted before. And that actually is something that we see all over the country. So if you look at the pool of eligible voters in the US, 83% are actually registered to vote. Like, the vast majority of eligible voters in this country are registered. But only 55% turned out in 2016, and that was really high for us. So we have this huge problem where we have a ton of people who've already registered, who want to vote, but who don't actually turn out. And there are a lot of reasons for that. A lot is that there is a ton of voter suppression. Voter ID laws are real and they stop people from voting. You can look at Wisconsin, where 300,000 registered voters don't have the ID they need to vote, and those numbers are tracked across the country. But there are also a lot of other things, like having to stand in 8-hour lines or longer, and having kids or in a disability or working an hourly job, or not having transportation to the polls, or a huge part is not having the education to understand how to vote, who you're voting for. Nobody knows what the comptroller does, right? Like, nobody knows what the county board of supervisors does. And so we have people who, maybe even get their ballot at home or sit down and they want to vote, and they open it up, and then we at Spread the Vote get tons of emails from people who have no idea. Like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I don't know how I'm supposed to do this. There's all of these rules. It's really confusing. And it ends up stopping a lot of people from voting. So we work really hard on voter education, both for our clients and community and for sort of voters everywhere, because there is just, voting is actually, it's not easy, particularly in this country. It's really confusing. And so the more resources we can have that make it simple for people, then the easier it will be for everyone to vote.
Yeah, I want to ask, why is it so complicated? But that's just not really a question I think that any of us can answer. It makes no sense to me. But
it actually makes a lot of sense. People in power
Right.
don't want new voters because they'd like to stay in power. If you want to stay in power, then you need the same people who've always voted for you, to keep voting. But when you have new people in office, they're going to vote for someone else. So, for instance, if you look at AOC, the reason she was able to beat an incumbent who'd been in office for like 452 years is because she primarily canvassed, which is what we call knocking on doors, calling people. She reached out to people who'd never voted before. Something like 92% of the people who voted for AOC were first-time voters.
Wow.
Like, that's what happened. She went to all the people who nobody goes to. And so we make it as hard as possible in this country to vote, because people in power, and it's the same thing with gerrymandering, right? And it's on both sides of the aisle. Once you're in power, you don't want to lose it. I have no power. I assume it's amazing because people are willing to do all sorts of things to keep it. That's why we make voting so hard in this country.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. I think that's fascinating what you said, that AOC reached out to first-time voters. What are some of the tools that you use to educate first-time voters and to get more people participating?
So their campaign was incredible because they actually built an entire tool and then went around and knocked on doors. We can't knock on doors right now, but what we do is we make our own voter guides that break down voting into, everything from explaining what is a mail-in ballot, what does early voting mean? Like, we'd have a glossary of terms, like when we talk about healthcare, Medicare for all, or income tax, whatever, what does that actually mean? We throw out these words and we assume that everyone knows what they mean. And really most people don't. And so we make guides that try to break down everything, including candidate platforms, to be as simple as possible. But we also do things like, starting next month, every Wednesday in September, we'll have online virtual classes that anyone can join that
Cool.
will teach people about how to read a ballot, how do you actually fill out your vote by mail ballot so that it actually gets counted, how do you, there's a huge problem in this country with people with disabilities being discriminated against at the polls. So we're doing a whole course on how to vote with a disability. What does the ADA say that people have to provide, that polling places have to provide, and how do you make sure that you know your rights so that you can, stand up for yourself? How do you vote COVID safe will be one of them. So we try to bring as much information as we can to people in as many ways as possible, and we'll be doing some campaigns and having some videos and all sorts of things to try to teach people and reach them where they are.
Fantastic. I want to get back to the COVID situation because it is an exceptional circumstance. However, staying on this topic of education, Ben, I wanted to ask you, civics education is one of your main endeavors right now, and kind of walk us through the situation with civics education right now. I mean, why are so many people uninformed, and how can we do our part to educate more people on this, crucial aspect to make our democracy run?
Yeah, so civics education, so everyone who's watching this, you may have gotten a civics class at some point between kindergarten and 12th grade. If you got a year of it, congratulations, you live in one of 8 states that is required to teach a year of civics or government at some point between kindergarten and 12th grade. Most states only require a half a year, and several states don't require anything. Back in the 1950s and 1960s, we taught civics a lot. We had 4 classes that were usually required at the state level, classes like US history, American government, foundations of democracy, and civics. And since then, these classes have been chipped away at, specifically in the last 18 years, since No Child Left Behind in 2002. All of these federal incentives in the form of funding were offered to states to increase their proficiency in reading and math, so that the United States could say, well, we're better than Norway at reading, which I don't know if is actually true. That's probably not. But we did this for these 2 subjects, right? And so we incentivized reading and math, English language arts, and mathematics over and over and over. We did it again in 2010 with Common Core, which was another initiative to increase proficiency. We did it again in 2015 with the Every Student Succeeds Act. So we've been passing these state level initiatives and also federal laws, which is really just funding to get people studying reading and math. And as a result, these teachers are just like, well, I got to teach the reading and math. I got to teach the reading and math. And there's all these new standardized tests. So all the focus is going there, and civics is just shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. And it's at the point where today only 16% of states require a year of it. But not only was it big in the 50s and 60s, this is something that our actual founding fathers wanted us to learn. George Washington tried to create a national university just to teach civics in 1796. It didn't work, but this is something that they knew was important. How are we going to be able to run the government and the country if we don't know how it works? So it's really interesting because I'm so in awe of Kat and everything she does to fight voter suppression. And there are sort of overt ways, right, that you can suppress the vote. You can make lines long. You can make it really hard for people to register. You can kick them off the rolls. You can go through many, many ways. One of the more sort of covert and less obvious ways is not teaching people why they should care. Not teaching people why their vote matters, not teaching people what the powers of these offices are, and teaching them that they have the power to influence who has them. And that, to me, is sort of a really insidious form of voter suppression, because it creates a generation of people who don't know as much as previous generations. So I think it starts with civics. It certainly doesn't end there, but civics, understanding civics and government is the foundation, not just to turn out in this election cycle, but for a lifetime of participating.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more, in the sense that I feel really I took civics in school. I remember it, and it's actually I was in 5th grade. And it was the first time that I was introduced to government, and when I started becoming really interested in it. I can remember it clearly. But one of the things that you learn, and especially for us who are involved, like we live and breathe politics every day, and it seems so obvious once you think about it in this way, but it's, democracy isn't just something that you practice every 4 years at the voting booth. It takes work. Like, democracy is hard. And we've all kind of decided, for the most part, that it's the most desirable system that we want to live under. But if we want to live under this system, then we do have to put in the work. So I think the 3 of us, we can all agree that, if we got to do the work, we might as well make it fun. And I really admire you guys for all of the efforts that you're making to bring more people into the system and to educate and inform people, but also do it in a way that's going to be appealing and fun. So I wanted to ask both of you, I mean, whoever wants to jump in, we can make this informal, but let's talk about some of these ways that people can get involved. And, you know, if our schools, like you said, aren't doing it for us, how can we take some ownership of what's lacking in our society and try to be more involved?
Well, one thing that I am huge on is voting parties, which during 18 was great because we could leave our houses and you could go to a friend's house and everybody could bring drinks and you could have voter parties. We can't do that anymore. But one thing we'll actually be doing in September is we'll be doing training courses teaching people how to have voting parties with their friends and family.
Ooh.
Voting parties, first of all, it has the word party in it, so we already love it. But one of the things that actually studies have shown, not that anybody cares about studies, but that's really interesting about voting parties is they actually do help people vote. So you may not know this, but back in the day when the real founding fathers were around, whenever white men who owned land, who were the only ones who could vote, went to vote, there were bands playing, the political parties had bourbon and whiskey. It was a whole thing. And so people would go, they would vote, and then they'd stay outside and they'd hang out and they'd drink and they'd listen to the band. And voting felt like a party and it was fun. So of course we had very high turnout. Also, most of those white men who own land weren't actually working, so they had plenty of time to vote. So now we're really encouraging people, have a voting party, invite all your friends and family. One of the things that my friends and I do is we separate, all of the ballot measures, and we'll say, all right, you study these two, you study these two, and we all study different ballot measures, and then we show up and, we bring a tipple, and we talk about it, and we debate about it. We say, this is what I found out about this ballot measure, and et cetera, and then everybody either has their mail-in ballot, and I see your question about mail-in ballots, so I'll certainly be happy to answer that. Or if you're voting at the polls, you get a sample ballot in the mail, and everyone will just fill it out. And, it makes it so much more approachable, so much more fun. We're going to have a little signage that you can have at your voting parties, and invite templates and all sorts of things, because if you make it fun and approachable and you get all your friends and family on, then you all talk about it, then at the end of the party your ballot's already filled out, and it makes it so much more likely that you're all going to actually turn in your ballot or go to the polling place and actually vote.
Yeah, and also it's so confusing. I have so many friends who call me, whenever there's an election, they're like, what do I fill out for this? And even I'm like, I don't know. I want to talk about it too. I'm definitely going to take you up on that voting party. I'm actually really excited. Any excuse for some wine and politics.
Exactly. Just because we don't talk over screens doesn't mean we shouldn't all have wine in a room with other people.
Absolutely. So I definitely want to get onto this mail-in ballots discussion. But while we're talking about this fun party, something that has always been quite interesting for me, but believe it or not, I'm Australian. I know, shocking. I don't sound it at all, but I am. And in Australia, we have compulsory voting. And I've had a lot of conversations with my cousins about this. Because I'm really intrigued by it. But my cousin his argument is that it's the best way to run a democracy, because in America, we get all of the extremists that go to the polls, only the ones who really, really care. But in Australia, everyone has to do it. And so they're much more, you kind of you bring the moderates in that way. And I was looking up the numbers, and Australia has 90% voter turnout. In the US, it's about 57% for presidential elections, which is actually at the low end of most developed countries. And then our local elections are just negligent. But also in Australia, they make it fun. It's like you said, what you were describing about back in the old white men days, when they had parties. They do that in Australia. It's a national holiday, and they hand out democracy sausages, and it's really part of the culture. So they're called democracy sausages. But I was curious on what your take on this is, because I find it interesting, but obviously I'm not, not the expert.
I have an opinion, but Ben, do you want to go first?
No, please go ahead.
Well, I'm super anti-compulsory voting. First off, because I'm an American and I do not like being told what to do, and you could honestly go after it. Do not tell me what to do. I hate it, and I don't believe that we should force people to vote. It also, I think that we've seen there have been some challenges in Australia. I advise someone on elections in Brazil because when you have compulsory voting, it gets higher numbers, but there have also been problems with people who show up who don't care, and who we've had problems with people showing up, countries have had a lot of problems with people showing up and they're just totally drunk, or they just, they go in and they won't fill out the ballot. They'll just, turn it in or whatever, because you're forcing people to do something. I think that it is a far better model to make voting as easy as possible, which we don't do in this country, and then to encourage people and inspire people and educate people so that they want to vote. The difference, when we work with our clients, between when we first talk to them about voting, they're like, no, I don't understand. I don't know anything about that. I don't know why I would want to do that. And then when we actually talk to them about, here's what these offices are, here's how they affect your life, here's the margins of victories in your town for city council, it's just a couple hundred people who make the decision or whatever, and you see them change, and you see them be like, oh, my voice really matters, I actually can vote, and then they vote. And we've got clients who we had vote for the first time in 2017, and now they vote every election. They can't wait. They're like, when are you guys picking us up to go to the polls? I think that it is always better to inspire and educate people than to force them to do something. And that, you're always then probably going to have slightly lower numbers. But so I always tell this story about India. India is my favorite country for voting because there is a monk who lives at the top of a mountain. It's a 300-mile, 4-day hike from town. And every single election, a team of poll workers carry a voting booth up the mountain on a 4-day hike so this one guy can vote. And then he votes, and then they turn around and they go back to town. That is a country that cares about making sure that every single person votes. And we should be more like that. And if we were, then we wouldn't have to force people to vote or fine them if they don't, because they really want to.
That's a beautiful story.
I love that story. I tell it all the time.
It's great. Yeah. Ben, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
I mean, I agree, about forcing, it just comes back to education and how do we, I think about, take, for example, what happened this week. I think a lot of people don't know who, with holding police officers accountable, I don't think a lot of people know what offices have the power to do that. In 2014 in Los Angeles, I live in Los Angeles County, and in 2014, the turnout for the district attorney race wasn't high. Turnout for a lot of the local elections are not high, but that is the person who has the power to prosecute police officers. Same thing with, the district attorney election in Kenosha County. Same thing for state attorneys general races. And there are a lot of factors, but just starting by knowing who the people are that affect the things you care about, whether you care about climate change, whether you care about criminal justice reform, whether you care about free and fair elections, it's connecting the dots between the thing you care about and the person who has the power to affect that, because it's not just the president, it's not just the executive branch, it's not just the federal government. It's state and local offices, and we do, by not teaching civics, but also just not making people aware of it through our media, because it's for-profit driven. It's how do we get people to pay attention, not how do we get people informed. People don't know the powers of these offices. They don't connect the dots between like their state attorney general and whether or not companies pollute their water or are held accountable for doing that. So to me, any way that you can do that, connect the issue someone cares about to the office or offices that affect them, that is helping people understand what they're voting for.
Yeah, and we'll probably find that the federal government, the presidents, are sometimes the least impactful in our daily lives.
Yeah,
So,
about 75 to 80% of the decisions that government officials make that affect your life are local and state government.
Yeah, so we got to vote in the midterms and in our local elections. I want to move on to the mail-in ballot question. I don't know who from here, but yeah, there's been, there's a whole controversy right now with mail-in ballots. People are confused. People are concerned. We have a president who is claiming that there is no way that this can be legitimate and your vote will be fraudulent. Can you just set the record straight? Kat, what is the situation with mail-in ballots?
Yes. So first of all, 1 trillion studies have been done. I think the rate of fraud in mail-in ballots is something like 0.00006%. Like, it doesn't happen. It's not. We don't have a fraudulent system. However, we do have a real challenge with USPS right now. Now, the great thing is we know this months ahead of time, so we can make plans to go around it. So there are a few things you can do. First of all, if you live in a state where you can vote absentee and where your state isn't just automatically sending you an absentee ballot, then you need to request it right away. And if you don't know the answers to either of those questions, visit your state board of elections. You can either, Google Arkansas Board of Elections, or it's usually like, io.elections.gov. But you want to request your absentee ballot. Like, now, while you're watching this panel, open another
do it. Just do it.
You want to be sure, because what happens, look, human beings, we love doing things last minute, and the day before the deadline, 10 billion people are going to request their ballots, and then they're going to wonder why they didn't get it because they flooded the system. So you want to request it right now. Then when you get it, you have a few options. First of all, if you're going to mail it back to through USPS, then you need to, the day you get your ballot, sit down, fill it out, and mail it out immediately. You need to give your ballot as much time as possible to be delivered. USPS is delivering mail. I got a new t-shirt yesterday, so I know the mail is coming, but you have to give them a ton of time. However, there are other options. In several states, and again, this is something you can find out on your Board of Elections website, and we'll actually be doing a big super fun campaign at the end of the month teaching people this too, so you can follow @SpreadTheVoteUS on the socials. But a lot of states have ballot boxes, which they don't look like mailboxes, but they're mailbox types. They're little boxes. You put in a form, and the Board of Elections picks those up directly. So if you are in a state with ballot boxes, rather than mailing it in, you can just drop it in there. USPS doesn't touch it. They go directly to the Board of Elections. In almost every state, you can also drop off your mail-in ballot at a polling place. And frequently, polling places will even have a table outside and a poll worker, and they'll just be like, great, drop your ballot in this little box, and then you can leave. So you don't have to stand in line or anything, but you can drop it off there. And in 20 states plus DC, third parties can drop off ballots for other people. So you, after having a voting party, can tell all your friends and family, I'm coming by, at 5 p.m. on Tuesday. I'm picking up everybody's ballots. You could throw it at me from 6 feet away and we'll wave. And then you can take people's ballots. So you can take it for your grandmother. Or if you are high risk and you can't go outside because you have COVID, if you're in one of those states, then you can get someone to pick it up for you. So you want to plan out, you want to make sure you know what those options are. The other thing you have to be really careful about is reading the directions and knowing the rules for turning an absentee ballot in your state. We discarded over 500,000 absentee ballots during the primary season, and a lot of that is because people don't follow the directions. So, for instance, you're going to have to sign the back of the envelope 99% of the time. In many states, you have to have 1 or 2 witnesses sign your absentee ballot as well. In some states, it has to be notarized. In some states, you have to include a copy of your ID. You need to know now when you request your absentee ballot and then look at the rules and find out what the rules are in your state. Find out if you live in Texas or some other states, you can only vote absentee if you're over 65 or you fit a narrow set of parameters. So you need to know, what exactly are the requirements in my state and how do I follow these? And the good news is it's only August. You have 2 months to make a plan, to figure it out, to make sure that your friends and family figure out this is something you should talk about at the voting parties, because it is possible to get all those things done. It is possible to make sure that your ballot is counted, but you have to plan and start early.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to have one of those voting parties, and I had the thought and then it just left me. So it doesn't matter anymore. But one of the other things, this is all super, super helpful advice. I hope that everyone is taking note and getting their voting plan ready. I love a plan. But I also heard in one of your podcast episodes, which by the way is amazing, everyone, it has all of the information that you need. It really just makes, Kat will get your voting plan in order for you. But
I will make a plan for you. I will make
you will make it. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I feel the energy. I'm like, oh my God, okay, I got it. I will. But no, you also said that one of the biggest things that we can do is to volunteer as poll workers. And
Yeah.
right after you said that, I was like, I'm young, I'm healthy. This is one sacrifice that I can make for my community. I'm just gonna go sign up and be a poll worker. And I'm actually really excited about it. So thank you for making me do that.
Yes, big guys. Okay, if you really want to make an impact and it significantly increase the number of people who can vote, be a poll worker. So 50% of poll workers in this country are over 61, which means half of the poll workers in this country, we need to be staying home and never leaving. You know, my mom is always a poll worker, and this year I'm like, Mom, you're not leaving the house, you're not doing anything. Like, she's very high risk, she can't be a poll worker, and she's every little tiny election we have, she's a poll worker. Not this year. But the thing is, so you probably all heard with the news from Milwaukee in March when they had a primary, and they had the very bad luck of having the first primary after the shutdown. So they were totally caught off guard. They normally have 180 polling places in Milwaukee. For that primary, they had 5. Wow. So there were lines for 8 and 9 hours. In Georgia, they had a similar problem. People were in line until 1 a.m. And this is because they didn't have enough poll workers. It wasn't even malicious. It was that COVID hit, nobody expected it, and they didn't have enough people who could work the polls. So now every single state, and we at Spread the Vote, we have been on the phone with so many boards of elections in so many states. They are desperate for poll workers. There are places, big cities, where they need thousands of them, and they're short. And here's the thing. If you work the polls, a polling place for the most part takes a team of 3 to 5 people. So if you and 3 or 4 other people volunteer to work the polls, that means a whole other polling place can be open, which means, depending on the size of your community, that dozens to hundreds more people will be able to vote than would be able to vote without that polling place. And it means it reduces the number of people who have to stand in line from, 8 hours to maybe 5 hours, and then if another polling place opens, maybe 3 hours, and so on and so on. So it's such an important thing. You get trained. In almost every state, you get paid. So, I mean, come on.
Yeah,
in
California,
money.
yeah.
You get paid in California. You get paid in almost every single state. It's a really easy process to get trained and to learn how to do it. It's a little bit of work, but they also need poll workers for early voting. So you don't just have to do it on election day. You can choose days. You can get paid for more days. And it is one of the biggest ways that you personally can make sure that dozens to hundreds more people are able to vote than they would be without you. So please, you can go to powerthepolls.org. It's probably .org, and sign up. We actually are doing a really big, super fun PSA campaign that's coming out in a week with some really cool videos to encourage people to become poll workers. So you can look out for that and Spread the Vote. But it's so important. And if you're young and if you're healthy, save grandma. We need all of our grandmas. I love seeing little grandmas working the polls, but we need them to be home now. So
it's our turn. Yeah. No, I think this is so powerful because I think it's really easy to feel helpless and like your voice doesn't matter and get drowned out by all the noise that we're seeing. And this is something that you have the power to actually do something to make a difference, a real difference that you're going to see and be a part of. And I think that's really, really exciting. But the one more thing before we move on from mail-in voting that I want to ask you, Ben, is I'm really passionate right now about when I speak to not just friends, but also followers on Instagram or whatever it may be, whoever will listen to me ramble about the election and voting. But we did this study at the institute where I work, and essentially it's called the Transition Integrity Project. And essentially, without getting into too many details, one of the biggest outcomes was just be prepared for this not to be a traditional election. It is very possible that we're not going to know who the winner is on the night of election, on election night. And I just want to tell everyone, it's okay. It doesn't mean that they're throwing out votes or that the whole thing is going to be fraudulent. Just trust the process, just get involved and just be prepared. So can you explain to everyone who might be confused about this, because I know people that I've been talking to have been really confused, I guess, what the constitutional process is, come November 3rd? What happens in between November 3rd and January 20th?
Well, I assume you're talking about specifically the vote for president. By the way, I read the Transition Integrity Project report, and it is terrifying. The scenarios that they walked through, that they quote unquote war gamed. There were 4 scenarios. They are really, really scary, and I think it goes back to the fact that we just fundamentally don't understand how we vote for president. And again, this is not our fault. Our schools did not tell us this enough times, if they did at all. So here is kind of how it goes. So it starts with understanding that we don't fundamentally have the right to vote for president. That sounds weird, but it's true. And this means that us voting for president, we're not directly voting for president. We are voting for people in our state, electors, to then vote for president. And we only get to do that because our state legislators said, hey, that's how we're going to choose the electors. But for the first 100 years of our country, state legislators chose the electors themselves, and people like us didn't have anything to do with it. There was no popular vote. So it's only been since 1880 that all of us, every state, has had a popular vote for president. So what that does is we vote on November 3rd, or hopefully before, early voting, all the different ways we can as early as possible. We vote, we cast our vote in our state, and that determines whether or not a Democratic slate of electors or a Republican slate of electors gets picked. And then between the date of November 3rd and December 8th, states have the ability to make changes to how they pick the electors. If there's a controversy, they can settle them. So there's about 6 weeks where they can figure this out. But then on December 14th, all of the electors are going to meet in their state and actually cast their electoral votes. And what they're going to do is they're going to meet in their state capital, and they're going to actually vote directly for president and also vice president as separate votes, separate ballots. And then those votes are going to be sent to the president of the Senate, who is Mike Pence, also the vice president. And on January 6th at 1 p.m., Mike Pence is going to count the electoral votes in the presence of Congress. And it's going to be the new Congress because they're sworn in on January 3rd. So they're going to be watching this vote count, and there may be issues, there may be controversies, and then those controversies are settled. And the idea is that in order to become president, you have to get a majority of electoral votes. So there are 538 electors total. There's an amount for each state and also for DC. DC gets 3. And you need 270 electoral votes to win both the presidency, and for the vice president, you also need 270 electoral votes. If nobody gets 270 electoral votes for president, either there's a 269 tie, or some third candidate splits the vote and no one hits 270, then the House of Representatives chooses the president. And how they do it is that each state gets 1 vote. So not each member of the House, so that we know California has 53 members of the House, Wyoming has 1. It doesn't matter. California gets 1 vote in this process, Wyoming gets 1 vote in this process. And you need 26 to win a majority of states. If no one gets 270 for vice president, the Senate decides, and you need 67 senators to vote. Oh, I'm sorry, 51 senators to vote, a majority of all the senators. So this is a crazy process, and this is actually how the president is and the vice president are elected. So what I would say to people who are confused about what I just said, or still trying to make sense of how we vote for president, is to pay attention to a couple dates. One is obviously November 3rd, but the odds that we know who wins the presidency on November 3rd are almost non-existent. So I would say pay attention to December 8th, which is the last chance that states could make changes to the electors. December 14th, which is the actual vote when they vote, and then January 6th when the votes are counted. And then whoever wins the presidency, either most electoral votes or the House and the Senate picking the president and vice president, they're sworn in on January 20th. But pay attention to those dates, December 8th, December 14th, and January 6th, because those are very pivotal events in what could happen between November 3rd and January 20th.
And it's okay.
I'm going to jump in with one thing. The reason, and it's really important for people to understand, the reason we're not going to know on November 3rd who won is because so many more people will be voting by mail than ever before. So normally we have about 40 million people vote by mail. We're expecting 80 to 100 million people to vote by mail this year. What that means is, for all of us who live in states like California, Washington, Oregon, where a lot of people always vote by mail, in California, sometimes it's months before we know who won a seat, because if you're voting in an electronic machine, the machine just spits out the numbers. If you're voting by mail, those numbers have to be counted and processed by hand. So it's not that there's anything malicious happening. There's not that states are sort of machinating in the back end. It's that people literally have to open up the envelopes, pull out your ballot, put it in a thing, and count the vote. And when you have 2 to 3 times as many people doing that, you know, we can't hire every American in the country to count votes, right? Like there's a limited number of employees, there's a limited number of Board of Elections funds. So it's just going to take a really long time because COVID has just forced so many more of us to vote by mail. So it's totally legit. It's totally fine. It's actually probably better this way because we're at a point now where we're already calling elections before half of the West Coast, you know, polling places have closed. So there's something wrong with it, but it's really important to know if it takes a few days or even a few weeks for us to know who won the popular vote for the presidency, that's okay. Keep calm, have a drink, chill the F out. It's totally fine.
Keep calm. You've already done your work. You've had your wine. Like, just exactly. It's all okay. We really don't need any more conspiracies in this world. So thank you for clearing that up.
And we'll have them. So when your uncle or aunt on Facebook says something crazy, just be like, look, don't listen to her. This is normal. Everybody calm down.
Exactly. Absolutely. Be prepared for that because we'll see a lot of it. I want to pivot to a second to some questions because I want to make sure we have time to get those in. So I think this would be for you, Kat, but whoever wants to just take it away. What are your thoughts on the idea of people taking a test similar to the naturalization test in order to be able to vote?
Yeah, we had that during Jim Crow. And it's a very bad idea. People shouldn't have to be, you know, educated to a certain degree to be able to vote. People shouldn't have to, you know, fit any sort of particular standards. I mean, we could have a long talk about the naturalization test and what I think about that. But we shouldn't have a test. We had that along with poll taxes and grandfather clauses and all sorts of things during Jim Crow. We still have a lot of those things in different forms, and they were wrong. Anyone in this country who wants to vote should be able to vote as long as they fit the very narrow parameter that you're a citizen. There shouldn't be any other requirement, and there are a lot of debates on both sides about whether or not you should have to be a citizen. But no, we should not have tests to vote. We had that before, and we got rid of them with the Voting Rights Act.
Yeah, can you actually explain what happened with the Voting Rights Act? Because I just learned that it's not what happened.
It exists in a lesser form. So if all of you remember the pictures you've seen of the big marches in 1965 and 64, et cetera, those were, you know, the civil rights movement was about a lot of things. It was about ending segregation. It was about jobs and a lot of things, but a huge thing that the civil rights movement was about voting rights for Black Americans. So although constitutionally Black men and then much later Black women legally got the right to vote, practically it was almost impossible to vote when in a lot of the northern states will pretend that they never stopped Black people from voting. That's a lie. Even California did. But it was very difficult and even dangerous in a lot of southern states as well. You know, my grandmother always tells me a story about her parents, and they kept a jar in the kitchen, and all year they put extra change into it. And then on election day, they pulled out enough money to pay the poll tax so that they could vote. And that was, you know, she was very lucky that she had a family whose parents could save up money to vote. Not everyone had that. Or they would have a grandfather clause. So if your grandfather could vote, then you could. Well, your grandfather was probably a slave if you were Black and couldn't, right? Or they would have literacy tests or all sorts of things to stop Black people from being able to vote, even though constitutionally we were allowed to. So in 1964, the Civil Rights Act was passed, and it ended segregation and a lot of other things. In 1965, the Voting Rights Act was passed, and what it did was it actually just gave the federal government power to enforce the right to vote across the country. So we were able to send in the National Guard, we were able to send in, poll workers and people to register voters, et cetera, to open up voting for everyone. And this is after my mother was born, right? This is a very recent thing at which Blacks were finally able to vote freely in this country. Then 2013 came along, and Shelby County v. Holder was argued in front of the court. And the Supreme Court of the United States, who again this year have decided that they are anti-voting rights, and in 2013 they were too, they decided that racism was over. I mean, we had a Black president, and like Black folks were out here voting, so clearly racism was no longer a thing. And so they took out a big chunk of the Voting Rights Act. So when you wonder, how come I didn't hear about voter ID laws until recently? Or how come I didn't hear about voter purging until recently? Or all these things? It's because they didn't really start to happen and didn't start to take over across the country until the Supreme Court decided that we no longer needed protections in voting. And so now we have voter suppression that is back on an extremely high rates, but also in ways that are much harder to get around than paying a poll tax, because the Voting Rights Act, it wasn't completely eliminated. There's still some parts of it that stand, but the big teeth of it has been eliminated since 2013. And so now the House of Representatives has a bill. It was H.R. 1, and then there was the People's Act. I think now they're changing it to the John Lewis Voting Rights Act or something like that. But it's a new Voting Rights Act. It is not perfect. It's missing a lot. But it's better than what we have, which is practically nothing. It's passed the House. Whether or not it is even introduced into the Senate will depend on who wins the Senate. Mitch McConnell has said very clearly that he's never going to introduce it. So if you care about voting rights, then you need to pay attention to what your Senate candidate is saying about what they think about voting rights and about the Voting Rights Act, because they will be the ones who help decide whether or not we get a new one passed in Congress.
And I would just add to that, it just goes back to the fundamental fact that states have the power to, largely run elections. And, we sort of think that, there's something in the Constitution that says like we fundamentally have the right to vote, but it doesn't. It lets the states decide. If you're able to vote for your state in your state house election, you can vote for your U.S. representative and your U.S. senator. There were people, before the 19th Amendment that protected women's voting rights. For the 30 years before that, 14, 15 states allowed women to vote. Even in the late 1790s and early 1800s, there were at least 6 states that let free African Americans vote. These were conscious decisions that were made by states to disenfranchise people, and it still happens today. So, it's really important to remember how the lengths that certain states and many states, and again, as Kat said, not just the South, many states have gone to make sure that that voting power is concentrated to people that are largely white, largely male, and originally, property owners.
Yeah, and the silver lining with all of this is that we actually can make a difference in this. We have the power, but it starts with education, right? So if we're aware of these things, the hope is that we'll be able to make a difference. And at the end of the day, there's one thing that I hope everyone takes from this conversation is that government, they work for us. We do have a power to influence the way that these decisions are made, but the only way we can actually do that is if we're informed. So I want to go back to the questions. It is also crazy, just another side thought, but just, I feel like we were taught in school that history kind of moves in a straight line. And, we had slavery, and then we had a civil war, and then it was over, and then we voted in a Black president. Cool, it's all done. And we're seeing now it's so strikingly clear to anyone that it's not. So we all have a role to play in this. I see Kat's ready to say something.
This is what there's books everywhere. I'm always grabbing one. So
I love it.
Called The Unsteady March by Philip Klinkner is an extraordinary book, but what it does is it talks about the history of racial equality, voting rights for Blacks, et cetera, in America from sort of the beginning of the country. But the thing that it shows so well is exactly what you just said, that it has always been 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and it tracks and traces how racial progress has changed and gone up and down throughout history. It's a fascinating read, and I think there are so many people who think like, oh, there was Jim Crow, and then there was the Civil Rights Movement, and then everything was fine, and have no idea about the complexity of how racial equality has changed in this country and how much we've always gone back and forth. We always will go back and forth. So I super highly, highly recommend this book, The Unsteady March. It's really thick. It's going to take you a while, but you're not going to be able to leave your house for like another year. So you have nothing better to do. Read this book.
Yeah. Oh, I'm going to read it for sure. I have I'm adding it to my list. That sounds great. I took a class on voting. I think I read similar book. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. I want to make sure that I get to everyone's questions before we wrap up because we don't have that much time. This is a really simple one. And just Marissa wants to know when their ballot's going to be mailed out. I'm assuming it depends on your state.
Yeah, it depends on your state. They generally try to get them out, and hopefully they're all trying to get them out earlier, but they're also super overwhelmed. But usually end of September, beginning of October, you should see them start to go out, and then hopefully get them, hopefully within the first couple weeks of October, you should be getting it. It varies by state, but that's generally when you should expect it.
Great. And then Sierra, I feel you. It is very confusing how American history works. I feel you, but you know what? We got, like, you can just it's interesting, it's fascinating, and the more informed you are, the more interesting it gets, and the more you feel like you have some sort of control in the destiny that this country takes. It's, progress is made when we all when we all come together. So yes, it's confusing, but don't be overwhelmed by it.
All history is confusing because human beings are ridiculous, right? Like, read Russian history, which first of all but we have nothing on Russia, right? Like every country, all history is just this ridiculous round of ups and downs and wars and people doing stupid stuff because that's who we are. We're humans. It's not our fault.
And we only have 270 something years to study.
Right. Well, for anyone who is trying to make sense of history, you can read OMG What Does the Constitution Actually Say, which is a short read. You can knock it out very quickly, and it helps make sense of where we've been, where we came from, and where we're going. And just to add is that, history is not one big linear thing. If it's the same people who have been alive for 200 years, yeah, it would be linear, but it's generational, which means the cycle begins anew. So we have to re-educate people, and then we have to teach people how things work and get involved. So it's a bunch of different repeating cycles. So it really isn't this clear, line of progress.
Absolutely. And I think we can see through recent history, young people and artists, they've really been behind so many of the great social movements of our time, and young people are the ones who push for change and who bring new, fresh ideas and continue the cycle. I want to pivot I want to ask one last question before we wrap up, which is I want to talk about the traditional role of entertainment, which, of course, is Hollywood. And Ben, with your experience working in Hollywood, and I can speak to it a bit myself. I want to know your thoughts on the responsibility that storytellers have, in shaping culture, or do they?
I think if you have been blessed to have a platform, if you've been blessed to have an audience of people that listens to you, then I think you have a responsibility to do something with it. And it doesn't have to be political, although I think today, if you're not using it for some sort of political or social or civic education, then I would think differently about that person. But I think if you have the blessing to have a platform, you should use it for a benefit. And right now, we're in this time where, in 2016, I worked at a super PAC. And the super PAC made videos that were very partisan to get people to vote. And they were celebrities telling people how they should vote, specifically that they should vote for Hillary Clinton and Democratic candidates up and down the ticket. And, in hindsight, I think that we could have used those people or those platforms in a different way. Because if you are able to get people's attention, I think you have a responsibility or an opportunity to educate them. And I think that educating people goes a lot farther than just yelling at them or telling them what to do. And so right now I'm trying to use our social media accounts and the books to just to teach people how government works, teach people how things work. And if you're able to, if you have a platform, you have a responsibility to use it. You know, and you do, I think the more stories, the more diverse stories we see, the more different perspectives we see, we start to frame things differently, or at least look at things from a little bit askew. We can never put ourselves in somebody's shoes for real, but we can at least start to consider other things or add information. So I think Hollywood has a responsibility, especially given its roots, which is a whole other topic of how the film industry was birthed. But I think now there is a responsibility to use platforms to educate, to use platforms for a social benefit. And I think that we owe that to our society.
That's really lovely, and a lovely way to think about it. So thank you.
Which is what you do, Nathalia. You have a large platform and you use it to educate people. So you're walking the walk.
Hardly, but I try. I hope, and it's like you said, I'm not an expert. I don't, you know, I just want to share what I'm learning. I'm not going to tell anyone what to think or how to vote, just as long as you think and you vote. But so I think this has been such an illuminating conversation. I'm so grateful to you both for all of the work that you're doing. I've learned so much from the two of you. I hope everyone watching has as well. And oh, I do have to ask, this is just a silly one, but I am curious. Ben, if Lin-Manuel Miranda were to make a sequel to Hamilton, who would you cast in the stage debut of what WTF does the Constitution actually say?
Well, I would, it would have to be somebody very short. This is James Madison, who is 5'4". He is by far our shortest president, and the shortest. So there you go. I would put you, Nathalia. What is gender? You have the starring role in OMG WTF does the Constitution actually say?
I love it. Okay, that's not exactly what I was fishing for, but I'm actually going to take it. I love it. Okay, well, thank you so much. For just a refresher, guys, go visit Spread the Vote on Instagram, online, wherever. Oh, and here, Marika's back.
That was awesome. Poked it all in.
Make it easy. It was so much
so
fun.
Amazing, and really, truly, so much information, and really, really helpful. I mean, the dates that, Ben, you know by heart, that you just like listed off. I mean, it is really fascinating how much it takes to get our votes heard. So thanks so much for all of your time.
Yeah, so it's get all your info at Spread the Vote, get this book to learn about the Constitution, and then follow Albright for many more really exciting digital events with fantastic speakers. You guys have such a great lineup.
Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. Have a great rest of your week. Thank you again to all. Ben, it's been real. Go GDS. and yeah. Thank you. Goodbye.
Cool. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.